Philip Tillotson, and I am a published author. These are my 2 books. Looking fabulous as always, aren't they? So before making these videos, I popped into a forum I'm on and asked people there, what would you, as an aspiring writer, want a published author to walk up and give you random advice on? One of the questions that was posed was, how long should my first draft take? And this question was a little funny to me. Not because there was anything inherently funny about the question itself, but because I have kind of a funny relationship with it. See, my first book, The Heart of the World, took me somewhere around 5 years from inception to wrapping up the first draft to make. My second book, The Witch of the Starlit Coven, took me maybe about a month at most. There were a few reasons for that. Firstly, Witch of the Starlit Coven is only about half as long as Heart of the World, and then on top of that, my life situation had changed. I got a new job, and this job gave me more time to write. And I also just went about writing the book a little differently, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail later. But to get back to the question itself, how long should your first draft take? Well, this is kind of the lazy man's answer, but it depends. It really does. There's not really a wrong amount of time your book should take, aside from never. It's probably a good idea to get out eventually. But anything beyond that is just kind of hogwash. I could give you some arbitrary time frame to adhere to, but I'd really just be pulling it out of my rear end. The thing is, not only is every writer different, every book is different. As I just mentioned, the time difference it took me to write the first draft for my 2 different books was almost 5 years, and neither of those time frames was the right one. It would have been nice if The Heart of the World only took me a month, but there wasn't anything wrong with the fact that it took me 5 years. The most important thing here isn't that you get the job done within some arbitrary time frame. I mean, unless you're working for someone else who set that time frame, but assuming you're the only person who's setting a deadline, the most important thing is just that you write at a pace that you're comfortable with. If you're holding yourself to some arbitrary time frame, and you're worried you might not hit it so you start rushing yourself, you're most likely going to be sacrificing quality. And while yes, the point of a first draft is to get things done, not do them well, that's what the following drafts are for. You don't want to ever purposefully sacrifice quality for the sake of getting it done. Let me tell you from experience, if you knowingly and willingly sacrifice quality to finish the book with the idea of, we'll patch it up in editing, you're going to wind up with a dumpster fire. And when you sit down to edit it, you're going to find yourself in the really, really hard situation of realizing the only way to salvage this book that you just spent years making would be to completely restart. And I went over that whole story in my Should You Write Every Day video. If you want to know the deal what that is, you can go check that out. What I'm really trying to say here is don't feel bad because your book is taking too long. Don't feel bad because it feels like someone else is absolutely killing it, pumping out novel after novel like it's nobody's business while you're still stuck on your first one. Their books are not your books. What they're putting out is not what you're putting out, and their journey is not your journey. Your journey might be longer, or it might be shorter, or it might be harder, or it might be easier. The answer really is that there is no answer. Write at whatever pace is comfortable for you. If you do that, then your book will be all the better for it. But okay, let's say you're trying to do that, and it's just not working. You feel like it's taking you too long. You're trying to write at a pace that's comfortable for you, but the problem is you're not going too fast, you're going too slow. If pushing yourself to just write faster isn't the answer, then what is? Well, that depends. I know, that's a non-answer, but there are a few things you can maybe do. So let's talk a little bit about my 1-month superstar, The Witch of the Starlit Coven. So, I've mentioned that my circumstances changed, and that simply allowed me to write more per day, but that's not the only reason I got this book out really fast. It's part of it, but it's not the only part. For one, I noticed something when it came to The Heart of the World. Anyone who finished the book was always like, oh yeah, that was great. But a lot of people kind of dropped off in the early chapters, and I knew this was a bit of a problem right from the first draft. The format of Heart of the World was always kind of a slow burn. When it came time to write my second book, I made a very deliberate choice that I wanted it to be quicker and snappier and easier to read. The chapters are a lot more self-contained, the action picks up quicker, and that sort of thing. This had a knock-on effect where not only is it a bit easier to read, it was a lot easier to write. It never went as deep as The Heart of the World, and no matter where I stopped off, it was fairly easy to jump right back in because the story was just structured in that way. So that's one thing you could theoretically do if you want to write a bit faster, is to switch gears to a story that's a bit faster. But that's not terribly helpful if you're already in the middle of another project, or the project you want doesn't really line up with this quicker, snappier kind of tone, and that's fine. I personally actually think that The Heart of the World is my better book, specifically because it's not as quick and snappy and easy to read. The question is then, what else can you do to move things along a little quicker? Now, the other thing that really helped me when writing Witch of the Starlit Coven is I did a lot more prep work. I didn't outline every single detail, but I did make an outline. I knew before I ever wrote a single word of the book exactly how many chapters it was going to have and a general idea for each chapter. I have a doc on my computer that summarizes each chapter in a short little paragraph. And the story wound up not sticking to this super rigidly. It didn't not stick to it, but things wound up happening a little differently than I originally thought. I wrote a summary for one chapter, and if you've read Witch of the Starlit Coven, you'll probably know the one I'm talking about, where a certain character was going to start their redemption arc. That's what it says in my summary doc. When I actually wound up writing the thing, though, this chapter wound up being right in the middle of the redemption arc instead. And it's not just chapter summaries I made either. This outline doc also had a list of all the artifacts of Z and what their powers are, which artifacts are used in which chapter, and so on. It took me a little bit to get this all put together, but having it there to refer back to whenever I got stuck helped me keep things on track. If I was hit by about a writer's block, it was as simple as looking at my reference document for what my original plan was, and a lot of the time that was enough to pull me out of it. So, if you're having a hard time writing your book, sitting down and summarizing all the remaining chapters could help you get your brain back on track, and it could also help with our final solution as well. If the chapter outline doesn't work, or it's just not your style, but you're still not moving as fast as you like to go, it may be worth taking a step back and looking over your story to see if there's something about it that's slowing you down. When I finished The Heart of the World, I jumped straight into the sequel. I had all these ideas buzzing around in my head, and I just wanted to get this trilogy onto the shelf, and yes, it's intended to be a trilogy. Yet, pretty soon, I found myself not really able to write anything new for this sequel, and this happened twice, even. Both times, I took a step back. I reread some of the story, and I did an analysis on what I had written and where I wanted to go. And both times, I found that there's this giant metaphorical boulder in the middle of the equally metaphorical path. The first time, ironically, I was moving the plot ahead way too fast. I just wanted to get to those big, juicy scenes in the middle, so I was rushing through the first couple of chapters. I was only 2 chapters in at that point, so I just restarted. And this time, by the time I reached that same point in the story, that was only 2 chapters in my original draft, this time it was 5 or 6. And with that boulder cleared, I got halfway through the book. The sequel to The Heart of the World is over halfway done. But then I ran into another boulder. I realized my villain was kind of underpowered, and I had basically exhausted all of my fighty ideas for their moveset, even though we were only halfway done. And the heroes just felt like they totally outclassed him. He was on the back foot, and any given encounter, even though I was trying to write him as this big, scary bad guy. And I kind of wound up in this situation where I was just saying he was a big threat, even though he kind of wasn't. And it got to the point where anytime I needed to write a scene with him in it, I couldn't do it. I haven't actually solved this problem yet, but I know how. I just have to make him a bigger threat, and hopefully once that's done, I can move on with the book. I could talk more about that, but my specific problem with Heart of the World 2 isn't the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that there might be an aspect about your story, maybe it's your writing style, maybe it's some characterization, maybe it's the setting, I don't know, something that's holding you back. And if you can figure out what that something is, you can come up with ways to solve the problem. And once that hurdle's overcome, you can hopefully get back on track. The other big reason Wish of the Starlit Coven was published so quickly is because I just never ran into any of these problems. Now, that wasn't some stroke of genius on my part, I just got lucky, honestly. But these kinds of roadblocks can really, really, really slow down your progress. So figuring out what and where they are isn't a bad idea. And furthermore, if you notice you keep coming to the same roadblock over and over and over again, then you can figure out what part of the way you write creates that problem. One roadblock I frequently ran into is this obsession with making all of the chapters approximately the same length. If a chapter is too short, I try to come up with a way to make it longer, and if it's too long, I try to think of what I can cut. And this is horrible. I should be focusing on what makes the chapter good on its own merit, not whether or not the previous chapter is about as long as this one. These kind of problems are usually a lot harder to overcome because they're usually more deep-rooted in the way you write, but being aware of them is a good idea. In a more recent project, I purposefully decided to try and make the first chapter shorter than I usually do, specifically to try and counteract this annoying reflex I have. You'll see if that winds up working. So, there we go. A few tips to help you get in the flow to write faster. Just remember, you don't need to write fast. If writing fast doesn't work for you, nobody can tell the story you want to tell. And it's always better to tell it your way, rather than sacrificing your vision to hit a deadline. Unless you're working for someone else, and it's out of your hands. See you in another video.